All right, I'm back. It's been a long time since I've gotten back to this darn book, to be honest. I mean, you know, I don't know, work was kind of fun. I passed out in the middle of work on Monday and whatnot. I'm all good, yada, yada, yada. And where'd that leave me? Well, that led me back here. So, I recover only to go through another emergency, which is reading Empress Theresa. Thankfully, this chapter is another 10 pager, so I'll just hopefully crank this out real quickly. Previously on Empress Theresa, uh, the chapter before this one, I'm gonna be honest, I kind of spaced out on this, so sorry, I'm kind of losing a lot of plot points. She made a bunch of water columns go up into the sky, and I think it was Korea that tried to like shoot missiles at it for whatever reason. It's like a bunch of political babble, whatever, and I don't know, something to do with like caves and growing and whatnot. I don't care, whatever. Let's get right into this. Chapter 13. We woke up at 8. Since this was the big one, the action that would bring rain to the world and save everybody's lives, I felt the event should be shared with the Parker household. We brought the chessboard and related sheet of plywood down to the living room and invited the Parker family and Arthur to watch history in the making. Oh yeah, that's right. The chessboard was for like the training thing she was doing or whatever. Anyway, the chessboard I used to control the North Pole water columns had 64 squares. The tag number on one edge of the board used up 8 squares, leaving 56 squares vacant. I put chess pieces on all 56 squares, then I replaced the last digit of the tag number that matched the parameters on the plywood sheet. The last step was to move my hands along the borders of the plywood to initiate the process. I did so. We watched the television screen showing the North Pole where the water columns would rise. A minute went by. Nothing happened. Steve and I looked at each other with puzzled expressions. Always another surprise we didn't want. A second minute passed, and there was still nothing. Steve said, "This is very annoying." It was a standard expression of his which it was a standard expression of his which he used when there was some outage on the news. He was trying to put humor in a situation far worse than annoying. This was alarming. This is very annoying. It's probably an inside thing. This is annoying. Doesn't sound like terribly funny to me. It's probably some of their character quirks that we never got to see because we never really see her and him interact outside of exposition. Anyway, what should I do? What should I do? I asked. Nothing. Wait a while. There was nothing wrong with the parameters I laid out on the plywood sheet. There was nothing wrong with the parameters I laid out on the plywood sheet. Maybe I hit my head when I passed out. I used the same parameters the day before to raise the 4 experimental columns. The only change I made was to the maximum height the 56 columns would reach. The maximum height the 56 columns would reach. The spacing in this book is just weird. That should have no negative effect. The Parkers looked embarrassed, but said nothing. Arthur kept a stiff upper lip. I was becoming depressed again. Hal drove me crazy. I did everything correctly, I claimed. In this world, perfection isn't good enough. There's no comma, by the way. It's just, in this world, perfection isn't good enough. Nitpicky, I shouldn't care about that stuff at this point, but oh well. A half hour had gone by with no water columns. Steve broke the horrible silence. "We'll try again tomorrow," he said, and got up to remove the 56 chess pieces from the board. He looked at Edmund Parker and managed a little smile. "Back to the drawing board." I asked one of those questions that make the heart stop, because I am so dramatic. Could Hal know what I'm doing? Steve's eyes opened wide. What I said was terrifying. Sounds like common knowledge to me. You're using Hal to do this stuff. How is this dramatic? I don't. Smile and nod, whatever. Ah, crud, I lost my place. Steven, yeah. What I said was terrifying. At the moment when I asked Hal to do something, that would fix the problem. At the moment I asked. when I the spacing is so weird. I'm so like I can't show anything, but there's like just random double spaces that make me think that I'm at like a period or like at the end of a sentence, and I'm not. Like I'm sorry that my like I know I'm kind of a bad reader, but I swear it's just the format is so weird. Anyway, at the moment when I asked Hal to do something that would fix the problem I'd been working on all summer, the rain problem, Hal failed to perform. He'd never failed to perform anything before. A shaken Steve addressed Edmund Parker. If this gets out, it will cause a global panic. Edmund Parker understood. We will be silent. The chess set and plywood sheet went back upstairs to my workroom, where I double checked all the parameters. There was nothing wrong with them. Something had been overlooked. That evening, Peter Blair called Mr. Parker to ask if there had been any developments in the Parker household. He said he couldn't speak on the phone. Blair asked if he could visit in the morning. Shortly after 10, the following morning, Peter Blair arrived in his limousine. His visit to the Parker mansion had been noted on the news, and Steve and I were told he was coming. Edmund Parker took Blair into his private first floor den and explained what happened the previous day. The PM was very worried. If Hal was refusing to cooperate, there was no hope. All may be lost. I think this is Blair talking, actually. All may be lost, he said to Parker. A few minutes before 11, we brought the chessboard and plywood back down to the living room. Steve thought that perhaps Hal would initiate something new, only from the third floor workroom where I had done all my work with Hal. A comma could have worked there. This possibility had to be ruled out, so we went back to the living room. There was no talking. The atmosphere was too oppressive. Steve signaled to Arthur to have a seat nearby. He thought it was rude to expect Arthur to leave. He'd been a loyal supporter. The television was turned on to the view of the North Pole constantly being provided by military planes. I put 56 chess pieces on the chessboard. Then I traced the borders of the plywood with my hands. Hal began raising 56 water columns at the North Pole. The observers in the planes were... Next page. The observers in the planes were surprised enough to exclaim the rudest expletives. Expletives? I think that's the word. I'd never know how to pronounce this word. I'm sorry, that's just me being dumb. Rude enough to exclaim the rudest expletives. Seeing the 56 columns in person was far more thrilling than seeing them on the television screen. We all smiled with relief. Hal was cooperating. We sat down as the columns continued to rise. We watched this exciting scene for a few minutes. Then, Steve gave his theory. This requires a lot more force than Hal has ever used. He wasn't ready to do it yesterday. He had to go get more power. From where? Asked the PM. The sun. I've suspected it for some time. Hal couldn't get it from Earth. There's nothing on Earth large enough to give Hal the momentum he needs. It can't be the moon's momentum, because Hal has been raising the small water columns near Gloucester, Massachusetts. That should use enough power to change the moon's orbit on a tiny amount. Astronomers haven't noticed that. It can't be other planets, because the planets are on the wrong side of the sun half the time. It can only be the sun. You have giant hurricanes racing around there all the time. They're big enough to blow away the Earth in a minute. Plenty of power for Hal. This is most remarkable. I assume that's the PM. I never know who's talking sometimes. Anyway, so if you think about it, you can see it. Again, is this Steve talking? If you think about it, you can see it can't work any other way. A lot of stars have no planets. Hals that wandered into a system like that would be trapped there forever unless they could see the star's power to send themselves back out into space. They couldn't spread through the universe and get to Earth. Hal must have infinite power. You bet. The sun converts 5 million tons of matter to energy every second. That's like burning a million Saudi Arabian oil reserves every few minutes. But I needed to unwind. I'm going for a walk in the woods. It seems like she's always like taking a break like every like there's like a couple like paragraphs where it's like, "Oh, I'm like doing chessboard stuff," and then it's like, "Bam, break time. I'm going for a walk in the woods." And I guess they just allow her to do it. "I'll join you," said Steve. The North Pole water columns reached a height of 1,000 miles at 4 o'clock. People thought I'd let them pour off at that point. Nope, they continued going higher. At 9 o'clock, they reached 2,000 miles and kept rising. Steve and I went to bed at 11. Mr. Parker called Blair to note this fact, and Blair leaked out that nothing would happen tonight. Everybody could go to bed. At 7 the next morning, the water columns reached 4,000 miles and kept rising up. The media was going nuts, wondering how long this would go on. Noon was coming near. We sat in the living room with the entire Parker family, waiting for the columns to reach 5,000 miles. Steve mentioned that would be the maximum height. Mr. Parker asked if he could call PM Blair and tell him. Sure, why not? Sure, why not? Steve said. Within minutes, the news was on the air. The water columns were actually ice columns. 100 miles above the Earth, there was only a trace of air molecules. The temperature was actually there. The temperature was actually this formatting. I can't show you, but it's written so weird. There was no temperature. The temperature was actually there was no temperature because there. I have no idea how I'm supposed to read this sentence. This format. Oh my gosh. The temperature was actually there was no temperature because there was no matter to hold heat. Third time's the charm. I got the sentence. Infrared radiation poured out of the columns. Just use parentheses. That makes it so much easier to freaking format. This right. The water quickly froze solid. Noon arrived. According to the banner at the bottom of the television screen, the height was 5,000 miles. This could not be measured exactly. Next page. In addition, the manner in which I had to pass parameters to Hal was not precise, so that even I didn't know the true height. The television banner soon read 5,012 miles. The ice in the columns was as hard as rock, and beyond the point at which Hal stopped providing support. The columns might stand up on their own for up to a mile. Finally, telescopes provided a faint image of the top of the column complex spreading apart. The ice columns could stand up no more on their own and were breaking apart. I don't know who's talking here. Approximately 24 minutes for the water to reach Earth, noted one of the media's scientific consultants. How fast will the water be falling when it reaches Earth? He was asked. 7.5 miles a second. Doesn't that exceed the Earth's escape velocity? Escape velocity and falling velocity work differently. Meteors come in at 20 miles a second. That should be an interesting spectacle. Very much so. No missiles travel anywhere near that fast. Think of getting hit by a mountain moving faster than the fastest missile. The military planes had telescopes that could barely capture the widening of the column complex falling down. This was the shower of fractured ice, falling parallel to the columns. As the ice fell, it was possible to estimate its height more and more accurately. Only minutes remained until the re-entry of the ice into the atmosphere. I felt a tingle in my spine. Time was up. A voice from one of the English planes patrolling the North Pole gave the height of the falling ice. 60 miles. 55 miles. 50 miles. 45 miles. 40 miles. A blinding flash whitened the television screen. There is only a whiteout to look at. It was a titanic explosion. Steve quipped, "It's not every day you see a white-hot water." You see white-hot water? I elbowed him in the ribs. After 14 seconds, the white flash faded away to reveal a 16-mile wide yellow ball. This ball expanded rapidly, and gradually turned an intense crimson red. Someone on the plane in the area said, "This is insane! It's a hydrogen bomb exploding every second!" Mr. Parker asked, Is that true, Steve?" "It's about right. I calculated 8 million tons of TNT every second." "Good lord." Last one. Adding to the eeriness of this event was the silence. The fireball was far from the planes, and the delay of the sound's arrival was startling. The planes were what was thought a safe 80 miles away. 2 minutes after the explosion began, an airplane crewman said, "Doppler radar indicates blast wave coming in at Mach 3. I hope we make it." The blast wave reached the plane. It was a very loud, low rumbling. The voice in the plane could barely be heard shouting something. Television viewers couldn't make him out. People began realizing. Next page. This was not a momentary explosion, but a continuous one, which would last as long as the ice kept falling. It was an astonishing concept, a continuous explosion. The initial noise was the front wall of the blast wave. After that passed, we could hear the plane's pilot. "It almost finished us. The plane dropped 20,000 feet." The red blasting ball had increased to 30 miles in diameter, at which point the matter cooled down to invisible infrared. Soon a new phenomenon began. White steam coalesced, I don't know this word, seemingly from nothing, some miles from around the bottom third of the red ball. These steam clouds fell at a steep angle to form what looked like a giant umbrella. Then, as the steam reached lower altitudes, it diverted more horizontally to spread out over the ocean. This cloud blanket was very thick, and meteorologists predicted it would spread out for hundreds of miles. The spectacle had reached a steady state. There was nothing new to see. The media talking heads turned to general discussion. How would this give the world rain? Wouldn't it just cause useless rain at the North Pole? It was agreed that's all it would do. "Has Theresa failed?" asked the commentators. "Nope. Steve and I had one more surprise for them. 2 hours after the North Pole explosion began, use a comma. 2 hours after the North Pole explosion began, people all over the United States and Europe noticed a rainbow forming in the sky. It didn't matter how little cloud cover there was, or even if there was a clear blue sky. The rainbow was visible everywhere in the United States." I'm sorry, the position I have to read this really sucks. How could this be happening? It was Steve's idea. He was a physics major and realized when the water hit the atmosphere, it would heat up to thousands of degrees. Hydrogen atoms would be stripped of their electrons and scattered in all directions at thousands of miles an hour. They would be spread out over most of the Earth, and when they came back down, they'd combine with oxygen to make it water. The rainbow came from tiny ice crystals high up in the atmosphere. The first tiny rain droplets were seen on windshields 5 hours after the North Pole columns first started exploding. It was a very slow and light rain. Very tiny drops were falling like a mist. But the important point was that it would be continuous, lasting as long as the water columns went up and down. The Weather Service said the rain would amount to a quarter inch a day, which was nearly 100 inches a year. That was enough to grow any kind of crop. There was one more problem to deal with. A whole year's food crop had been lost, and it was September. Winter was coming. The West was in fair shape, but Asia couldn't make it through the winter. They would have families unseen in all history. I went to my workroom and started I went to my workroom to start my last surprise. I had another chessboard and plywood sheet with parameters for a new Hal task. I put one chess piece on the board. This would tell Hal to exert a 5 billion-ton force on the poles. She knows that for some reason. More pieces could be put on the board later to exert more force if needed. Finally, I moved my hands along the borders of the plywood to get Hal started. With that, there was nothing to do but wait and see what happened. Next page. Prime Minister Blair showed up shortly, before 10 p.m. He was very anxious to talk to me. Steve and I went down to the living room. I mentioned to the Parkers they were invited to watch us. Arthur was there too. The PM began. Greenwich Observatory reports the Earth poles are moving. Is this true? Steve answered while I had the fun of watching their talk. Yes, sir. Theresa is turning the Earth pole. Theresa is turning the Earth pole over pole. Turning the Earth pole over pole. Okay. The Earth declines 23 degrees and 27 minutes from the plane of its orbit. This causes the seasons. Theresa wants to decrease the declination to 5 degrees to give everybody summer weather all year long. The farmers can grow 3 crops a year. They can start planting now. How does she do this? She has Hal push rock under the North Pole with billions of tons of pressure in one direction and the same force on the South Pole in the opposite direction. To counteract this torque, she exerts the opposite torque on the moon, but you'll see no change on the moon. As it revolves around Earth, its torque cancels out. When will it reach 5 degrees? Theresa wants to do it by Christmas, but we don't know how much force to exert. The Earth isn't a solid ball. If you could have the daily change in declination reported on television, she can adjust the pressure. It will be done. Mrs. Hartley is trying to eliminate winter. Yeah, she figures we don't need it. Good Lord, he said, looking at me. You'll be remembered for a million years. Yeah, for the wrong reasons, at least according to readers. Getting rid of winter sounds like a great idea. Like, I'm sure there's a... if somebody in the comment section can tell me what the effects of just having no winter and it's just sun, 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 I guess, forever, like how that affects the Earth, I'd love to hear it in the comments, and I'll pin it, I guess. She'll be remembered for a million years. Looking back at Steve, he asked, May one inquire what other plans Mrs. Hartley has? She has no other plans. When you think about it, Hal is not very useful for anything unless you want to move the Matterhorn to Texas, which is a tempting idea. What else can she do with Hal? Nothing. Good Lord. I can't keep saying that. It's a blasphemy. So much power, and she can't do anything practical? Pretty weird, huh? Why does he keep doing that? He did this like back, like I'm talking about the writer here. He spells hun. I don't know what this is. It's Hunh. I don't know if it's supposed to be huh or what, but like at first I thought it was just a typo, and this is the second time it's been done. Like I might have to look this up at the end of a chapter because this is just weird. Pretty weird, hun. Smiled Steve. We'll probably become professional college students. We can't get jobs. Thank you for the information. I'll leave you now. It's late. Are you going to tell people about this? This moment, the astronomers already question. This moment, the astronomers already question. I don't understand that sentence. Edmund, your telephone? Of course, old boy. You could see how excited the Prime Minister was. Now it will hit the fan. Steve. Now it will hit the fan, said Steve. Okay, that ends that. Which, I don't even know what to title this episode. Just explosion, ice, I don't know. The next chapter is... oh boy, so it's 218 to 230. Yeah. A little bit longer compared to what the last 4 chapters have been, but oh well. Glad to be back, I guess. Or I mean, I'd say it's good to be back, but it kind of isn't because, well, I don't know. It's not even really like a fun read or anything at this point. I mean, been just kind of going through the motions with this. I don't know, still kind of recovering from an incident that I sort of had at work, yada yada yada, but I don't know. Closer to being done with this, Theresa can like control Hal with a chessboard. I probably tuned something out in an earlier chapter. Like I don't know if she has like some sort of psychic link with it, or if it's just a visual cue that she's like communicating with Hal. I think it's that. They talked something about that, but whatever. The next chapter, it's at least the halfway point. Um, have a good one.